one of the major points is that we are trying to establish ourselves as the movement experts. In all of the fields, we are the experts on movement. And now analyzing movement, picking up movement, fixing movement, etc., because movement is fundamental to us, right? That's the most important thing. One of the most important things is to get around and move. If you can't move, your daily life is not particularly cool. Gait. Person wants to move. They don't want to learn to sit on a couch. They don't learn how to sleep, generally speaking. Like you come and see a patient, geriatric, orthopedic, neurological, a lot of the time, the key thing they want to work on, that's a patient. What can I help you with? My personal partner that works like you with. What do you want me to help you with most? Most of the time they will say movement, gait. I want to get around. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking at this movement system, and part of that, throughout the whole curriculum is going to be focused around movement. So this is one of the key courses to start applying, thinking about movement, analyzing movement. All right, in terms of biomechanics definition, it was kinesiology, biomechanics, internal organism, looking at the biomechanics, mechanics of the living body, looking at muscles, gravity, etc. Basically, as the name suggests, the mechanics of the body, how it relates to movement, how a patient's biomechanics change. What can we learn from biomechanics to help either diagnose and or treat our patients? We understand movement. To understand movement well, we have to understand biomechanics, I would say. You have to understand kinesiology. Okay? Because we want to fix that movement. Why is that person moving that way, not like this way? A lot of that is due to biomechanics and kinesiology. So that's what we're going to emphasize, biomechanics and kinesiology this semester. In terms of biomechanics, again, this hopefully is just a review. Two branches, kinetics, right? Kin movement, metrics of movement, measurement of movement. So kinematics is the description of movement without regard to cause, what I can see. That knee is bending this way. The person is picking their foot up. The speed of the limb is this. The step length is this. So this person with Parkinson's is this. This is measuring what we can see in the movement. We don't know why that person is limping, but we know they're limping. Kinematics would tell us they are limping. They've got a short stride on one side or a step length or whatever. Their knee is too straight. Their knee is bending too much. They're falling up, whatever. That is what we see. Now, why is it occurring? The causes, the forces, and momentums, the inertia involved are going to be sort of more like kinetics. Okay, so kinetics examines the causes. Kinematics is the result of that, what we can see. Fair enough? We've all heard those terms before, hopefully. In terms of another way of looking at biomechanics, you can speak to dynamics and statics. Obviously, dynamics is movement. What is going on when a person moves? The mechanics are going on as the person walks, steps, hops, jumps, whatever. Statics, we look at statics when there's no movement. We use statics a lot to look at forces, how much force has been applied to the body. Here I'm standing here holding a weight in my arm. It's static. All right? I'm not bending it. It's not moving. So I can analyze the system, the mechanics of the system, try to figure out what is going on at the joint level. How much forces are going on? How much force is going through my hip now, causing arthritis? Why is my knee, painful? Where's the force applied in the knee? So that we're looking at in statics. And we'll go over some examples of that as we get on. All right, so far so good. This old hat here, right? So is all this, right? Quickly whiz through these. AP, yes, or terminology, ventral versus dorsal. There technically ventral and dorsal are locations, right? These are directions, but we use them interchangeably, really. Something's dorsal to something, or ventral to something, we kind of mix them up. Lateral median speed, yes. Vastus laterals, tragus, okay, no problem. Proximal distal, yes. Superior inferior, yeah, no problem. Cranial means towards the head, so that's up. It's very similar to superior. Caudal means, what is it called, acquire? Caudal equine is the horse's tail. So that's the tail. So caudal towards the butt. Towards the head. Bicep, sep is head. Bicep, 2 heads, right? Triceps, 3 heads, that's towards the head. And rostral is towards the, what's? You haven't heard that word before? Yeah, anatomy, you come across that word? In neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, we use that word quite a bit. Because this word comes from rostrum, a Latin word meaning the beak of your bird. So it's your nose, essentially. This is your beak. So when we say rostrally, we mean towards your nose. And that's important. Basically, it's the same as caudal or cephal or superior throughout the body. If you're saying go, if I'm in the lumbar spine, I say go towards your beak, you're going to go up this way. If I go superior, I'm going to go up this way, aren't I? Go towards your head, you're going to go up this way. But if I'm in the center of my brain, okay, the basal ganglia, let's pretend, and I say go rostrally, I wouldn't go up, I'd go forward. Because in the development of the brain and nervous system, in evolution terms, in terms of advancement, the brain develops upwards, 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 and then forwards. So the most advanced part of your brain is your frontal lobe. That's the biggest lobe. That came latest in the evolutionary terms. So it's not the same as superior. The top of my brain is not as smart as the front of my brain, as it were. Make sense? Your frontal lobe, that's the thing us humans have got huge ones of compared to other animals. Other animals have got, you know, cerebellum and parietal cortex, etc. But the frontal lobe is the big one compared to other animals, except for, of course, our friends the dolphins and the whales who've got massive frontal lobes. So they're pretty smart dudes too. Ipsilateral, contralateral, same side, opposite side, yes. Superficial, deep, no problem there. Unilateral, bilateral, yep. Just want to quickly make sure we've got all these words. Anatomical position, remember that is this position, hands supinated, forearm supinated. This is the position we start any movement. When we talk about movement analysis, if I ask you in an exam question, what does the pectoralis major do? You would say what? I'd say, what is the action of the pectoralis major? What would you say? Come on, I'm going to talk to Chad in a minute.
Adduction, medial rotation.
Adduction, medial rotation, and flexion. But it only does that in this position, right? Its action will change depending where my arm is. If my arm is way up here, the pectoralis major will still be a medial rotator, but in this case, because the line of action above the axis of rotation, it's going to be an abductor. Make sense? So your muscle action changes depending on the starting point of my limbs. That's why we need a reference point to start with. Because you could give me 20 different actions for the lats, depending on where the arm is in space. So unless we say otherwise, assume this position. Okay? And this would be the fundamental position that palms by your sides, right? Remember the piriformis. Remember how the action changes depending on how bent the hip is, right? So that's a anatomical position. Always assume that otherwise stated. All right, kinematics, metrics of motion, measurement of motion. Osteokinematics we're talking about. Here we're talking about bones, not arthrokinematics. That's going to go into immense detail.
Minuscule detail.
It's going to bore you to death, and me, but it's very, very useful. Arthrokinematics, movement of the joints. How does each joint move in relation to the bones, sliding, slipping, rolling, etc. Very important. We talk about mobilizing joints. You as PTs can make a joint move of somebody else that I can't make myself move. I can't make my arm do certain things, but she could make it do it for me to help range of motion and certain things. So arthrokinematics is going to look at joints. Osteokinematics is basically what we term like bending bones, elbows, shoulders, etc. Okay, so we're looking at, when we describe osteokinetics, we're looking at our movement, remember. We can look at the planes of motion, axis of motion. Again, this will be hopefully very familiar with you. Osteokinetic types of movement, names of movement, quick list. Quickly scan this. I hope you know all these, but just make sure we know what we're talking about. Flexion, extension, hyperextension, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. Any questions there? You've all come across those terms before, right? Now, here's a difference between Kathy and I. Kathy's a PT. My supposed expertise is more biomechanics. I dabble in PT. So in a biomechanical, it's a very, very strict way of measuring movement and talking about movement. PT is a bit more wishy-washy, which is fine. I get wishy-washy too. So, for example, flexion is usually two anterior surfaces getting close together. Okay, not always. In knee flexion, two posterior surfaces getting close together, right? So this is flexion, right? All know that. This is extension. Fine. This is flexion of the shoulder. When we talk about flexion, we should say flexion of the arm. That would mean the arm is bending in the middle. We refer to a joint. Flexion of the knee, hyperextension of the shoulder joint, right? All right, so this is flexion, all agree? The shoulder. This is what? Flexion, and what's this doing then?
Extension.
Extension, what's this?
Hyperextension.
Hyperextension. On a biomechanical world, but in PT, typically we just say that. So if I ask somebody to extend your hip, they'll do this. You know, we'll talk about extension, but technically, if you go past the anatomical position, past neutral, it technically should be hyper something. Okay, you go, the flexion is up, extension is return to the normal position, and go past that, technically it's hyper. We don't strictly say that, although we should, Kathy.
I would be so confused.
So, yeah, makes sense. So things like adduction, you know, this is AB, right? Typically in PT, we'll say AB and AD, or abduction, abduction, you know, what am I saying? Abduction, I don't know. I think it's very easy to mix them up, right? Abduction. So we'll say AB duction, typically AD duction. You say that, Kathy?
AB and AD.
Yeah, you say AB and AD. So ab and ad. Hyper ad, I can't go past here, my body's in the way. So if you flex a bit, it's sometimes called hyper adduction. Okay? And transverse is in this penalty. Transverse abduction and adduction away from the midline. Okay? So ab and ad, remember, is towards or away from midline. Fingers. Remember, ab and ad. Horizontal abduction, same thing. Rotation, circumvention, supination. Yeah, all heard those, know what they are. What's supination of the foot? You all said you know that, right? So what is it? Inversion. That inversion of foot is inversion of foot. It's not supination. Third right. Supination is a combination of three movements. Remember? Yes or no? Have you heard that before or not? Yeah. Can you talk about supinating the foot? Pronating the foot? Yes, no?
Really clear, yeah.
Very good. So I'll be very, very good.
Tarsal joint is the only thing I can look at.
Okay. So supination, and we will talk about a lot in gait. Very important in gait. In fact, we'll talk about that. Art will kill you on supination, supination of foot. So supination of foot is plantar flexion. It's a combination of movements, three other movements. Plantar flexion, inversion, which is a sole towards the other side, as it works, inversion, and adduction or medial rotation. You'll see both, either one put in there. So again, down, plantar, in and around. So plantar flexion, inversion, and medial rotation or adduction. And pronation is the opposite of that. That's eversion, dorsiflexion, and lateral rotation or abduction. Okay, a lot of people saying he supinates too much, he pronates too much in his gait, and how do we fix it, etc., etc. So you need to make sure you know what those are. Supination, pronation of the hand, no problem, right? Protraction, protrusion, retraction, retrusion. Protraction or protrusion, something forward, goes something forward, like I can protract my shoulders, I can protract my jaw forward, I can retract it, take it backwards, retract the shoulder blades, as it were. Inversion, eversion, yeah, no problem. Elevation, depression, yes, heard earlier before. Opposition, reposition. For opposition is thumb to the tips of the fingers. Radial deviation or radial flexion, yes, we all know that one. Ab and ad of the wrist, right? Towards the radius, towards the ulnar radiation, ulnar wrist adduction. Finger and thumb flexion, extension. The only difference, remember the poleaxe works differently than the finger. So finger flexion, IP flexion, remember, is this, or MCP flexion. But flexion of the thumb is across the palm. So it's orthogonal to the fingers. Abduction of the thumb is away from the palm forward. Adduction is down to the palm. So ab and ad of your thumb are not the same as ad and ad of the IP joined to the fingers. MCP, right? All, no questions there. Am I going too slow? Yeah. No? Too fast? Just perfect. Just perfect.
As usual.
As usual. All right. Active, okay, let's look at the, again, very quickly review. We have 3 planes, and with each plane is an axis orthogonal to it. When we describe the movement of somebody doing something or other, we want to know what is the axis of rotation, what is the plane they're moving through or across or whatever. All right, so in each axis, there's a plane 90 degrees to it. They don't switch around, they don't ever swap. This axis is always 90 degrees to this plane. There's never any change. You know? So we look at the 3 major planes. Sagittal separates left and right. Frontal or coronal, front and back. Transverse, horizontal this way. There is one cardinal plane in each situation. A cardinal plane is the one that cuts you exactly in half the center of gravity, okay? So if you cut everybody, you know, those 3 planes are fully set at the dead center of gravity of the body. The cardinal plane is sometimes called, for the sagittal plane, is sometimes called the mid-sagittal plane. You see that terminology, or the median sagittal plane. That's a cardinal plane, one cuts exactly left and right. Any other plane, if I cut myself exactly in half, that's the mid-sagittal plane or cardinal plane. If I chop my arm off this way, take a slice down here, that would be a sagittal plane or a parasagittal plane. Okay? And the axis that goes through that, 90 degrees, that of course is always the bilateral axis, or BL, typically used. You see other terms, medial, lateral, yeah, frontal, yeah, I don't like that. It confuses you with frontal plane, frontal horizontal, yeah. X-axis is another one in biomechanics. So with that axis and rotation, we get this motion, right? You generally move forward and backwards in this sagittal plane. And using these axes, flexion, extension, hyperextension, there you go. Look, hyperextension.
I see that.
Flexion of the leg, of the knee, 2 posterior surfaces coming together. Plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, it's all axes going this way. Yeah, some people get confused by this, I don't know why, but just think about a tire, a wheel, and there's the axle. You can only spin that wheel on the car if the axle sticks through this way. You can't stick an axle to the end of the tire and expect it to rotate this way. Okay? Frontal plane or coronal plane, AP axis. So it's in the belly button, out the back kind of thing. It rotates that way. There are terms for the other axes, but we use AP axis all the time. And with that kind of axis and planes, you get these motions, ab and ad, all the deviation, radial deviation, in the anatomical position, lateral flexion of the neck, side bending of the spine, whatever. No questions, right? And finally, a transverse plane or horizontal plane. I like transverse, and I like the polar axis. Do you use polar or longitudinal?
I've used longitudinal.
Okay, so that's not bad. Polar axis or longitudinal axis down the length and length of the body. Don't say vertical axis, right? Because what happens when a person's lying down? It's not vertical anymore. Remember, these planes and these axes stay with you wherever you go for the rest of your life. You put somebody on a spit and rotate them round for cooking them, that's going to be the polar axis.
And a felony.
It's not the vertical axis. It would be, I mean, technically you should be calling it that, but it's not vertical. The key thing about the transverse plane, remember, any movement performed in the transverse plane is going to be what's termed gravity eliminated. Have you heard that term before in other classes? Gravity eliminated is very important to get through term to get into your head, because this is the way we will test patients often who are very weak. We give exercise in gravity eliminated positions. We will quantify their force production by can they overcome gravity. So if I'm making a bicep curl like this, I'm doing this. Is gravity helping me or hindering me if I do a 12-ounce curl? Gravity eliminated or gravity assisted or gravity hindered, what do you want to call it? It's stopping it, it's restricting me. I'm working against gravity to lift my pint up. Okay? So gravity is stopping me, trying to stop me lift my rear. All right? How would I make an elbow flexion movement in a gravity eliminated position? How would I test my biceps? Let's pretend my bicep is so weak, and you see patients who cannot do that. Their bicep is too weak to bend their elbow. But it might be able to bend their elbow in a gravity eliminated position, and we'll quantify that. And how would I make the person move in a gravity eliminated flexion elbow thingy? Think. It's obvious. It's sitting right there in front of you. Change angle of shoulder. Yes, you have to have that motion going through the transverse plane. So I can test, I'm too weak to get my arm up like this, but I can bend my arm like this. Because gravity is not resisting elbow flexion in the transverse plane. It's going to pull a hand down this way, yes, but we're not looking at that. We're looking at elbow flexion extension in this case. And gravity is not a factor stopping that motion. So I might have a strength to be able to do that, but not do this. And there are many patients we will find have that issue. Obviously want to work up from this to this. Okay, how would you do hip abduction in a gravity eliminated position? On your back, lying down. Problem with that, of course, is what? You do it in bed, what's the problem with that? Falling? I don't, no, I'm in bed.
Oh, okay.
I won't fall out my bed typically. Earthquake maybe, but what other force would hinder me doing hip abduction in my bed?
Friction.
Friction, yeah. Moving your foot across the bed like this is going to be pretty hard, and you wouldn't do that. You have to think about, how you can do sliding boards and all that kind of stuff, powder boards, but many times you need, just remember, and you'll be doing this in therapeutic skills tons and tons and tons of time. Okay, now you know how to do that. Now let me see you do it in a gravity eliminated position. Put your patient in gravity eliminated position, and you do this.
Talk about that position too. With the bicep. What gravity does in this position with the bicep. You talked about hindered and
oh,
assisted.
okay, yeah. So in this situation, of course, this is gravity eliminated. If I do this, it's gravity assisted, isn't it? It would be helping the elbow in this situation. You probably wouldn't need your biceps. You just, gravity helps. Gravity does it for you, right? What was I going to say something about? How would you perform shoulder medial rotation in a gravity eliminated position? Shoulder medial rotation. How would you do that? Remember, the motion has to be in the transverse plane, right? All right? Shoulder medial. So think about, to make it more obvious, bend you over. Now, when I do this, what motion is this? Just doing this. Who's moving this? What joint? Shoulder, right? Shoulder. Now, is my arm going to the transverse plane, my forearm? Yes. So this is a gravity eliminated position for the shoulder rotation. As is this. This is the same. Right? This, if I lay on my back and do this, on a plinth like this, and I'm doing this motion, is that gravity eliminated of the shoulder joint? I'm on my back, and I'm doing this exercise like this. Gravity eliminates or not?
No.
No. If I imagine a dumbbell on my arm here, that's really going to force, help, or hinder, facilitate or hinder my shoulder rotation. So think about that. We look at the knee, the hip, all those kind of things you're going to be doing in the future. How do we get that person moving to the transverse plane? Then it will be gravity eliminated. If not, gravity's either helping you, facilitating you, assisting you, or preventing you. Okay? All right, fair enough. That's a pretty simple concept. And there's some motions in the transverse plane. Shaking my head left and right, saying no. That is the head going to the transverse plane. If I nod my head to say yes, what is the plane of motion and what is the axis? I'm saying yes. Nodding my head. What is the axis of rotation? Bilateral axis, sagittal plane. Is it in mid-sagittal or sagittal? Is it a cardinal sagittal or asagittal? Yeah, dead down the middle, right? So nodding your head, doing this motion is sagittal plane, mid-sagittal plane, cardinal plane, whatever, and bilateral axis rotation. Finger abduction. Plane axis, please. What's a plane? Finger abduction and axis of rotation and plane of motion. What would it be?
Anterior, posterior axis and coronal.
Everybody agree? Good. Anatomical position, remember, this way. Not like this. Okay? Fair enough. We've reinforced some of these in the lab, I think. Some special movements for the shoulder. Kat's going to go into these a lot later on. But you see depression and elevation, protraction, retraction around the thorax like this. And then upward or lateral rotation. What do you term this in anatomy? What was the term for? When I do this with my arm, what does the scapula do? Upward rotation. What muscle does that? Go on, give me two muscles that upwardly rotate the scapula.
Serratus anterior.
Serratus anterior. Trap. What is the? So when we get to these, guys, we expect you to know what muscles do that. We're not going to go and reteach that. You're supposed to know that, right? You're supposed to know the nerve that goes to the serratus anterior. You're supposed to know the nerve root that goes to the serratus anterior. You're supposed to know where that nerve runs. Where's the likely place of a lesion to that? So, serratus anterior, what nerve?
Long thoracic.
Long thoracic nerve roots.
5, 6, 7.
5, 6, 7. Easily damaged because it is. Why is long thoracic nerve often damaged?
Runs down the side of your body, so blunt force.
Yeah, it's one of the few nerves that runs on the surface of the muscle, right? If I whack in here, I can get it. It's not hidden underneath like most of these other muscles, right? Other nerves that come out underneath the muscle at the back. This thing's quite superficial. I mean, dissection, remember, you cut it out like here. Yes? And it comes off the nerve root. So it's quite easy to whack in here and and then mess that up. And then, of course, clinically, we'll see if you lose that ability, that will eventually lead to impingement syndromes, right? Remember, if I can't rotate my shoulder blade up, I want to reach it up here for a light switch, someone's got to give. I'm going to bang my shoulder into my arm into the scapula here, and we get impingement. So all these things that fit together later on as we talk about orthopedics, we talk about Biomechanics, and we talk about movements. So all those nerve roots and muscles and all that rubbish you learn, it's very, very important. We're going to apply it. Types of motion. Quick review. Kinematics, sliding, up, down, back, forward, left, right, whatever. Translatory movements, translation. So my arm is sliding. There's no rotation at all. Translation. Each part of that bone moves exactly the same distance in a linear motion. It's up or down or left or right or front or back. You've heard that term before? Yes, translation, sliding motions. Some of our bones will do that. Will slide across each other. You know where, look, opposite but different, is the rotary motion, rotation. Now, each part on that joint, on that bone, moves a different linear distance. But it will move the same angular distance. Okay? This is what we do. We've got limbs, we've got joints, we've got extremities. So we can describe my body as a point in space. And we pick the center of mass typically. So when I walk down the road here, I will often want to take my velocity with that patient. That's translation. That is assuming that person is a dot in space at the center of gravity. So I'll measure their gait velocity, their gait acceleration, or whatever. If I want to know how they're doing that, I've got these things bending as I walk. What is going on? This joint is not bending enough, not flexing enough. So now we look at rotation about an axis, because that's what we've got. We've got joints. Remember, if I look at, here's an arm bending from here to here with your hand, my favorite beverage. This part of the bone has gone 40 degrees. The hand has gone how far? What is displacement of the hand in degrees? So this part, I labeled whatever that dot on my arm, has moved through 40 degrees. How many degrees does the can move through? 40 degrees, of course. Yes? That's just too common sense to notice, and it's obvious. You thought it was a trick question because it's too easy. This has gone through 40 degrees, right? If this is going through 40 degrees in 1 second, this is going through 40 degrees in 1 second, right? That's rotation. But what is the distance this has moved in linear terms? This could be whatever, 4 inches. This could be 2 feet. So linear changes, displacements are not the same. The angle change will be the same. The angular velocity will be the same. But the linear distance will be different, and the linear velocity will be different. Okay? How do I derive the linear velocity of my hand given that equation, given that distance, that setup? In other words, I know this is going at 40 degrees per second. Do it like that. Oops. 40 degrees per second. Every single part of my elbow, my forearm, is going at 40 degrees per second. Because it's all joint. Can't possibly go any other speed because it's fixed along. All right? But when I throw something, a ball, I don't really care about the angular velocity. We do in some respects, but I want the hand to be going as fast as possible, linear velocity. So I'm going to chuck this javelin, this ball, this baseball at as high a speed as possible. I want to get a linear velocity into that ball to Strike the dude out. All right, so I care about a linear speed of the end of my extremities. When I kick a soccer ball, I care about my foot going as fast as possible because I want to get the ball to go as fast as possible toward that goal. Okay? So what do we need to take into account besides the angular velocity? We want linear velocity of the tip. And what's the equation that from your biomechanics you've had with Polesgrove, what? How do you relate the linear velocity to the angular velocity? Remember the equation, velocity tangential is so the tangential velocity is your linear velocity of the hand, let's say, of the foot, is a product of the angular velocity, which is like 4 degrees per second, and the radius, the length of the lever arm, whatever it is. So with other things equal, it's all going at 4 degrees per second. This thing here, the hand, is going to be going a heck of a lot faster than this part here in terms of linear speed. Because this is the radius here, this dot on my arm. There's my radius. Here's the radius of the hand, the ball, whatever it is in your hand, right? So the way to throw something far is to impart a lot of linear velocity to it, okay, at a right angle, 45 degrees, whatever. And the way you do that is by increasing your angular velocity as fast as possible and having dirty, great long arms. The longer your arm or leg, you're going to get a faster speed at the head. The head of a club. That's why your drivers are a lot longer than your putters. The longer the arm, the longer this radius is, and given the same angular velocity, the faster the head of the club will be traveling. Make sense? Important kind of equation to remember when you're looking at ballistic skills. Anyway, this is angular or rotary motion. We do that in our body because we have joints. And the axis is not always the same. We're not made of hinge joints like in a door. The axis of rotation does move, and Catherine talked about this a lot. How when it's the femur rotating on the tibia. So this instant is called instantaneous axis of rotation. Any given instant, freeze the frame and say, where is it pivoting around? That will be different a few seconds later. As the shape of this cam, this pulley kind of method, not perfectly spherical, and it will roll down here and slide with all of weird things, this will change. The action of muscles will change. One muscle might flip from here to here because that instant axis of rotation has changed. Like your IT band, that will flip from an extensor to flex depending on where the knee is. You do tests that on the ACL, you use that principle. Does that make sense? The instantaneous axis of rotation? So we looked at linear, we looked at translatory movements. Mixture, curvilinear. So this would be rotation, right, for this thingamajig. This is translation. This is curvilinear motion. Okay? Things are going on differently. That's curvilinear. A bit of both, as it were. Another point, when we're looking at joints, how they rotate, about axis of rotation, we can classify joints by the number of biomechanical degrees of freedom. Have you done that in anatomy at all? A bit? So what are degrees of freedom in a statistical sense? If you've done stats, right, you always go degrees of freedom for the t-test or the ANOVA is n-1 or n1 plus n2 minus 2, something like that. What does that mean? Degree of freedom. When it means in a statistical sense. What's the definition of that? Same thing, sort of thing here. It's a degree of freedom. We talk about motor control a lot. things are free to vary. It's not fixed. So when I move my shoulder, my arm, my humerus, it has biomechanically 3 degrees of freedom. The number of axes it can rotate around. So I've got my internal external rotation, I've got ab and add, I've got flexion extension. So this has 3 degrees of freedom. What about my MCP joint? I can do this side, I can do this, I can do the circumduction. So how many degrees of freedom in my MCP joint? We've got one book for 3. All agree? 3 degrees of freedom for MCP joint?
2.
2.
It's the conjunction movement with the circumduction.
Exactly. I can flex and extend my MCP, right? I can ab and add. Can I rotate it? Is this not rotation, my finger?
No.
That's supination pronation, isn't it? Or shoulder. So I cannot get my finger, and I'm trying hard as I can, seriously. I cannot rotate it. I'm really trying, honest, and it won't move. That's 2 degrees of freedom. Even though I'm circumduct, look kind of rotation, it's not around axis rotation, okay? So when we talk about when we get into motor control, we look at neurological degrees of freedom. We look at muscles attached. How many muscles attached to the scapula?
17.
17. You all know them, don't you? Some come from the spine to the scapula. Some go from the scapula to the arm. You should get a picture in your head, that little scapula with all red and blue splodges on it, right? And go, teres minor, teres major, teres anterior, subscapularis, interparnatus, omohyoid, blah, blah, blah. We count those and you see 17 of them. We have so many muscles controlling the scapula and the humerus for one reason only, to move the hand. The hand is vital to life, evolution, picking things up, picking your nose, eating, whatever. It's important we have a nice, movable hand. Put it anywhere we want, all around us. So that's why I have tons of degrees of freedom with them biomechanically. We also have lots of degrees of freedom in our muscles, 17 muscles. We can individually recruit those. Within those, we can turn on motor units. A massive control problem. It's a big problem for the brain controlling the arm. In motor control, we'll talk about how we do that, but for now, just be aware it's a problem. It's advantages and disadvantages. Allows the mobility, but I've got to use a lot of effort to control that. I don't need any cognitive effort to control the length of my humerus. It's stuck, it's fixed, it's a bone. There's no degrees of freedom in this humerus lengthwise. I do not need mental power or muscles to control the length. I need muscles to control this thing. I need a lot of them. I need a lot of brain power to do that. All right, degrees of freedom. What influences those? What influences how much I can move within any degree of freedom, any biomechanical degree? How much flexion can I get? How much extension? How much add, whatever. These are some of the things that will limit the movement. Joint surfaces. Very, very important how two bones interact with each other. Catherine's talk about a lot about how they rotate or slide or screw or bend as they join, like the screw home mechanism of the knee. We've all talked about that, right? In anatomy, popliteus and all that stuff. That's very important. Tissue bulk is very important. When I have my favorite pint of beer, ale, and not Budweiser. I don't drink water. You don't drink water in England. At a bar. All right, you drink ale, real good beer. So anyway, what was I talking about that for? When I'm trying to have my
5 o'clock somewhere.
favorite beer, often I have a hard time getting it to my lips because of my huge biceps. I struggle to get, it's a massive, I have to put it down and drink it like this. But me having huge biceps really restricts my drinking ability. So I use a straw. Anyway, so yeah, it says if you have a massive militime muscle, it's hard to touch your toes, right? A massive militime here, you can't get down and touch your toes because of tissue bulk. Too many lights or not. Anyway, connective tissue, your ligaments, your tendons, obviously going to stop moving. For example, your knee is mechanically a very unstable joint. You've got this big old femur sitting on a flat surface of tibia. Very easy to slide off all over the place. We run around, we land on these all day long, and they want to fall off everywhere. Fortunately, we have the ACL and PCL and MCL and LCL holding that steady, right? That's connective tissue, essentially. And Cass is going to talk about what types of connective tissue later. If you those rip, of course, falls off. Or you use muscles to stabilize. You use your hamstrings to stabilize to a bad ACL to a certain extent. So muscles can turn. And bone limitations, of course. Bony blocks like extension of the elbow. What stops my elbow going past straight most of the time, most people? The olecranon process goes into olecranon fossa, bang, and stops, right? Bone, bang. You'll learn to assess these end fields in movements. Why doesn't this bone bend more, this joint? Why not? Does it feel normal? Is that what it's supposed to feel like? Or is it different from normal? I mentioned that the Russian javelin throwers used to have their olecranon process surgery sliced off, because then you could throw faster and you go straight through the end point, allow you to flick the javelin more when you go throw it further. So you get into the javelin, have your olecranon process shaved off. Go down lab, get the bones still out, quick slide, there you go. Good to go. All right, any question on any of that? You want to take a quick stretch break, run around, hop, skip, and jump, breathe, bathroom, 5 minutes, we'll get on to the next set of slides.
No, I think that was.
We will definitely slow down that a bit, but this is all review, hopefully, right? Yeah, 90% of this you've got, so just want to make sure everybody's on the same page, particularly those folk who come from outside of us and for the degree rather than going through the whole 3 years. All right, let's look a bit more about kinetics. Kinetics, we're looking at, of course, the causes of movement, so now we're looking at forces. We're looking at force, inertia, moments, this kind of stuff. Force is a push or pull, right? This is where a lot of where we get our movement from, muscle contraction force. Internal force is where we get a lot of our movement from, but we cannot ignore passive components for movement. Elasticity, the natural inherent elasticity of connective tissue, of endomyosin, perimyosin, all those thingamajigs within a muscle at the ends. We'll get into this later, but series and paraelastic components. We've got a lot of elasticity in the body, which we can use in our movement. And if you're good, you'll use more of that and less of muscle. We have external forces that can be applied to the body. You as a therapist can apply forces to the body, to a muscle, to a joint, whatever. And as we get better, of course, as a person goes from a novice, I think we'll talk about more remote control about this, but as a person goes from a novice to an expert, to do the same thing, throw a ball 10 yards at the 10, your muscle contraction is going to go down. And we can measure muscle contraction using EMG, and we'll do that in one lab. We're going to measure you making muscle forces by slapping electrodes on you and measuring the amount of activity coming out of your muscles, okay? So as you get better at a skill, you want to use less and less muscle as possible and use more elasticity and things for free. We use gravity. So as I get, for example, as I learn to throw this marker this way, I might use a lot of muscles to start that motion. As I get better, I'll be probably using a lot of pendulum action. Okay? There's not a one-to-one link between kinetics and kinematics. Just because a person moves this way, I cannot directly say what the kinetics are. Okay? So, I can, and I've done some experiments, I can bend my elbow like this. So here's the kinematics of this skill. Elbow flexion at 10 degrees per second. What muscle is doing that? What's causing this? Here's my kinematics. All right. What is the muscle involved in doing that? What muscle is causing my elbow flexion? Biceps. No. It's not. What is it then? Brachialis? No. I'm using brachioradialis. I'm pretending. I could be. And I could. You can't tell me by looking at motion how I'm doing it, can you? You cannot tell. You think you're using biceps brachialis, but you might not be. We've done experiments at SSA where we had people turn this off and just use brachioradialis to do it. So there's not, just because you see something does not mean you know how it's get caused. Okay? So that's why we look at EMG number things. All right. So kinetics, again, review Newton's laws. You've all heard these, right? First law, quick review this. Body remain at rest or in motion at constant speed unless acted upon by an external force. Common sense, right? Can we say for any object in equilibrium, the sum of all forces and all torques must equal 0 if the object is stationary. So we use this principle that all forces and all torques must be equal when we analyze statics. Statics, by definition, is not moving. Okay, so when I'm holding this weight here, I've a 12-ounce weight in my hand, shaped like a beer can for some reason. I hold it here, it's static, it's not moving. You can see it's not moving. So the force of this weight and its lever arm, the distance from its weight to the elbow is going to cause a torque or a moment. Have you heard the term moments? Yes? Force times distance. Yes, you all okay with that? Or torque. It's going to want to do this. It causes extension. Because it is static, because it's not moving, you can see it's not moving, there must be an equal torque stopping it. So my muscle, my biceps, must be creating a similar torque, okay, in the opposite direction. So the plus torques and the negative torques, when you add up, it's going to equal 0. All right? Clockwise torques are usually by tradition negative. Counterclockwise torques are positive. Add a positive and a negative torque together, and if there's 0, it's not moving. If the X force and your two X forces, the left and the right force, exactly the same, it's not sliding. If the down force equals the up force, it's not going up or down, it's stationary. We'll use this when we analyze joint reaction forces. Because it's static, we know those forces must be balanced. We can use that principle of the sum of the moments or sum of the torques equals 0 and the sum of the forces equals 0 to calculate muscle force. We can calculate joint torque, we can calculate joint reaction forces, etc., etc. And we'll get into that next class. This number is easy. So Newton's first law again. So inertia is what we're dealing with here. Inertia is the property of an object resists translation, left, right, up, down, front, back, or changing translation. And it's directly proportional to mass. The more mass, the more inertia an object has, right? Simple. Remember the difference between mass and weight. What's the definition of weight? As in E-I-G-H-T, not A-I-T. It's a force due to gravity pulling on that object, isn't it? So it's a force from gravity. So my weight will change if gravity changes. My weight on the top of Everest will be less than my weight at sea level because gravity is less on top of Everest. Little bit. Your weight on the moon will be a lot less than your weight here. Your mass will be the same. The mass is the amount of stuff you've got. Not its force. When gravity acts on it, pulls it down, it gives you a weight. You can measure the force due to gravity with a vacuum scale. Okay? But for that, if I want to try to slide this person, this table across the floor, or this weight, the more inertia it is, the harder it is to slide. So I've got a big, tall filing cabinet. I do not want to slide it across the floor. I want to topple it over. I want to rotate it now. So here's my filing cabinet. And if I want to slide it, I push it this way. Right? The more inertia that has, the bigger that thing is, the harder it is to slide across the floor. But I don't want to slide it now. I want to be a pain and hip jerk and tip it over. I want to do that to it. Push it over. What is the rotary equivalent of inertia? Moment of inertia. Right? Moment of inertia is the resistance to change in angular motion, not linear motion. Linear motion, inertia. So you've heard this in biomechanics, yes? You've done moment of inertia in biomechanics. What is it then? Define it for me. How would I measure it? Theoretically. How do I measure a thing's moment of inertia? Any idea?
The amount of force required to get it to move.
Yeah, good attempt sort of thing. Well, you can actually measure a moment of inertia of something by swinging it and looking at its pendular action. You can measure it that way. But theoretically, I'll explain what moment of inertia is to give you a conceptual basis with. So this is the formula for moment of inertia. I equals the sum of every little bit of mass times the radius of that mass squared. You can't actually do this because you can't measure every single bit of particle of that object, but this is how it actually. So here's an object. Let's pretend this object has 4 pieces of mass. Some weird kind of dumbbell. Let's just pretend there's 4 pieces of mass of the object. And I'm going to pivot it around here. I'm going to push it this way. Let's pretend. All right? Forget gravity and all that kind of stuff here. So if I want to calculate the moment of inertia of that object about this axis, I would measure this piece of mass, its weight, its mass, times this is the radius from the axis of rotation, and square that axis of rotation. I'd then add it to this piece of mass times its radius, and this piece of mass times this radius. Make sense? That's how theoretically moment of inertia can be conceptualized. So the bigger the mass, or the longer the radius, in other words, the distance from that point of mass to the axis of rotation, the greater the moment of inertia is going to be. So if I want to increase the moment of inertia of an object, I could do this. I could move this bit of mass over here. And I'm rotating about this axis. That's going to have the same moment of inertia, a much greater moment of inertia. But the mass might be exactly the same. If I added this mass would be the same as 1, 2, 3, 4 bits of mass. That makes sense. If I move the mass away from the axis of rotation, R is going to go up, and moment of inertia is going to go up. Harder to rotate. Okay? Or, let's say I do this, 4 pieces of mass, and I put this bit of mass way over here. Moment of inertia increases, right? To reduce moment of inertia, I could rotate it about this axis here, right? If I put it in the middle, then the moment of inertia is going to be less. The moment of inertia depends on where the axis is. The inertia won't. I have a 10-pound dumbbell. Whenever I slide left, right, up, down, everywhere, inertia is the same. The rotary resistance to rotary motion will change depending on how I rotate that 10-pound dumbbell. Okay? If I rotated this bit of mass lengthways like this, the moment of inertia is going to decrease. So look at this when we look at spins. Now, if you want to spin, rotate fast, what do? you get your mass as close as possible as you can to your center of rotation, the axis of rotation. That's why you spin a lot faster than an ice skater with your arms here than here. All right? And as you do this, the conservation momentum, we'll talk about later, will go faster. Right? That's why, for example, in gymnastics, a twist is valued less than a somersault. It's easy to spin this way and it's to spin this way. That's why a full layout somersault is much harder to do and will be better than a pike somersault and a tuck somersault. Make sense? Tuck is easy somersault to do. The layout is the hardest somersault to do. Because why? Your moment of inertia is greater. Make sense? Second law, see this one, F equals ma, right? Force, mass times acceleration. Acceleration is directly proportional to the force and inversely related proportional to the mass. To an accelerated body, you apply a force to it. The greater the force, the greater acceleration. The smaller the mass, the greater the acceleration. Okay? Big mass, acceleration is lower. Small force, acceleration is lower. Okay? And again, moment of inertia can be very important in the acceleration of an object. Third law, action reaction, right? We've all seen this one before. Every action is opposite reaction. Very important in PT when we look at things like ground reaction force. When I put my foot on the ground with this much force, the world pushes back at me. If I did not have the equal and opposite reaction, ground reaction force, my foot would go into the floor. Since a foot does not go into the floor, I know if I hit the ground with this much force, the world pushes back at me exactly at that force. Okay? And the direction of that ground reaction force in relation to this leg, for example, is very important in creating either flexion or extension of each joint. So if the line of reaction, the ground reaction is behind the knee joint, if I hit the ground, what's going to happen to the knee? The ground reaction force is behind the axis of rotation of the knee. What will happen? If I do nothing, it's going to cause flexion, isn't it? The ground reaction force, not showing a good one here, let's pretend here or here. If the ground reaction force line is behind the axis of rotation, it's going to cause flexion of the knee. To stop that, you have to do what? Turn the quads on. So this is going to cause a flexor torque, and my quads come on to prevent that. It could cause an extension torque. So where that ground reaction force lies in relation to the joints of the body will determine the forces and what muscles come on and how much force they make, etc., etc., etc. And Kat's going to talk a lot about that in gait, aren't you?
Of course I do.
All right.
Ad nauseum.
Kinetics. Again, we're looking at forces. Push or pull is a force. It's a vector quantity. What's the definition of vector? Magnitude plus direction, right? Scalar is only direction, right? Remember that? I'll quickly review this. Distance is a scalar or vector. Come on, folks, quickly. Distance, is that a scalar quantity or a vector quantity? Scalar, yeah. That's a distance. Displacement is a vector quantity, has direction. So if I was to run down on a track, 100 meter sprint down from straight down a straightaway, I started here and it finished 100 yards away, my distance is what? My displacement is 100 meters, plus 100 meters this way. I've gone 100 meters, I've displaced my body 100 meters that way. If I run around a 400 meter track and end up where I finished, my distance is 400 meters, my displacement is 0. If I ran around 390 meters and stopped 10 meters before my start, my distance is, I ran around the track 390 meters, stopped 10 meters before the start. My displacement, my distance is 390, my displacement is minus 10. I've gone backwards 10 meters. Right, direction. Fair enough? None of that's new, is it? Refresher, kind of cobwebs in there. When we look at forces, these are the things we need to be aware of, and in that force is where that force is in terms of define that force. To define a force in muscle, it's a muscle acting on a bone. We need to know all those things to fully know where that force is and the effects of that force. So here is a bone. Here's forearm. Here's my hand. Here's my biceps. To know who's going to apply a force to cause flexion. I need to know the line of action. That's what the line it's in. We need to know the magnitude of the force. That will be the length of this line. That's a small force. That's a big force. That's a small force. We need to know the direction. So we put an arrow on the end of it. So we know it's going that way or this way. Okay, the direction tells you a lot. What way it's pulling. And then the point of application there. It's on the radial tuberosity. So we need to know all these thingamajigs about a force to be able to define it. And since it's a vector, we can represent that force by an arrow. And the way to define that, to tell you where the arrow is, we can either use Cartesian or polar coordinates. You're familiar with that? Cartesian coordinates? Yes?
That's the
X, Y, Z, three-dimensional Z, yeah. So I want to know where this arrow is in space. I can, there, I can use X and Y coordinates. 5, 7, 3, 2. Minus something, minus, plus, right? You can use that to tell me where that arrow is in space. So if you tell me this is 8, 5, you know where that is in space. Fair enough? You can also use polar coordinates, which I use more often. What's a polar coordinate? How would I tell you with a polar coordinate where that vector is in space? Polar coordinate. You've heard that before or not? No? So this is, you give me an angle and a magnitude. So this is the length, 50 newtons, and this is the angle, 60 degrees. So you want the magnitude and the angle. You always take the angle from the positive x-axis counterclockwise. So if this is an hour, here's a vector down here, I would go 80 newtons, and I'd go like this. 280, 90 degrees, whatever. Okay? So you always go this way around to get to the arrow. And we'll use this when we look at gate. Make sense? Polar coordinate or a Cartesian coordinate. Forces, gravity is the most obvious issue we face. Gravity is the most prevalent external force on our body. Okay? We think of center of gravity, center of mass, right? S2, that's where we think of all the mass is concentrated. This is the balance point, it's sometimes called. If I want to find an object's center of gravity, we can either balance it. I'm going to find the center of gravity of this thing. Where is the center of gravity of that? It's fixed in this case. So what I can do, I could balance it on my fingertip. There, I could draw a line straight up. Right, I'll leave that line. I now turn over here and balance it somewhere. Draw a straight line up. Where those lines cross, that's the center of gravity of that thingamajig. I can balance it here. You know, all those lines intersect somewhere in here, the center of gravity of this object. Or I can hang, and this thing needs to hang. Get a bit of cotton thread, hang it from here, draw a line straight down. Hang it from here, draw a line straight down. And there you find the center of gravity of the object, right? Theoretical point. It moves. The center of gravity moves in any object that can move, can bend or flex like we do. In this case, the gravity is moved outside of the body here. Like, where is the center? Let's pretend you have a donut with a hole in the middle. Where is the center of gravity of the donut? Think about hanging it from a piece of string, drawing a line down. Turning it around a bit, hanging it from a piece of string, draw a line down. Where's that line? All those lines going to intersect? Space in the middle of that donut. The donut is in the circle. In the middle is a hole. That's where the center of gravity of the object is in that hole. Right. So we can move our center of gravity. Here's a little bit of trivia. This is why you can jump so high, because of Fosbury flop, right? He invented this. Where you arch over a bar, you can pass the center of gravity under the bar. The center of gravity does not have to go over the bar with this technique of jumping. So you can jump higher. Before he came along with that, you had the Western roll and the straddle jump. So this bit of trivia. This won't be on the exam, probably not. So here's the Western roll height. That's how far they got. Then he invented straddle, 1937. Fosbury flop came in, and look at the increase in height. Because he could jump over the bar without the center of gravity going over the bar. All right? So there's the techniques. And pole vault, same thing, right? Pole vault, you go way up and you arch like that. So the center of gravity is nowhere going over that bar. If I have to get the whole center of gravity over the bar, like this kind of action, the height would be much less. Right? Within segments, we have center of gravities. I can chop my arm off. This will have a center of gravity in it. When we do a lot of inverse dynamics, we need this information. We need to know where the center of gravity of various parts of the body are, because those are creating torque all the time. We can find this in the old days. We used cadavers. We'd cut arms off people, and we'd balance them and find where the center of gravity is. Okay, and some of those are not all represented because many of these people were not volunteers for this. They were prisoners, and they weren't typical of population, and they chopped up cadavers and found center of gravity as a percent of the arm length. So I can look up for you, for example, I'll say your center of gravity of your upper arm is going to be 12% from the blah blah to here. And we know that's okay, so it's going to be here for me, for my forearm, it's going to be there, 15%, 50%, whatever. Okay? This is how we do inverse dynamics, and we might talk about that later. Line of gravity. Line of gravity is the line going straight toward the center of the Earth from your center of gravity. All heard it before, right? Skip on to that. Very important in balance. To be able to be stable and static balance, you need a line of gravity in terms of base support, right? Kim was talking about this. The wider the base support, right, the more space you have to move that line of gravity. So that's why I have a walker or canes, because it increases the base support. You want to keep the line of gravity in the base support, because if it goes outside the base support line, you're going to fall or you're going to have to step. So we are constantly perceiving, my proprioceptors are perceiving where my line of gravity is, subconsciously. As I get bored and I gradually fall over this way, it detects that and will push this leg up and move me over. As I fall forward, there's a certain critical threshold where that line of gravity approaches the margins of the base support, and then it will cause plantar flexion. Once it goes out the base support, I go step. So wide base support, more stable. Disadvantage of wide base support is what? What's the disadvantage of a wide base support? Less mobile. Inversely proportional, right? Sports, sometimes you want to be a wide base support, you want to be stable, someone's going to hit you, you want to put your base support in line with the perturbation. So if someone's going to run at me and try and hit me, knock me over, I don't stand like this, right? I do this. Right? Get ready to brace this way. And I want my weight over my front foot, and I can walk back on this foot as it hits me, and I still have my line of gravity inside the base support. I stand on the train, it's going back and forth this way, braking and accelerating this way. I don't stand like this. I don't stand like this. stand like this, won't I? In any sense, or like this. So I can receive the perturbation, keep the line of gravity within the base of the force all the time. But this is very unstable. So I'm going to do a sprint start, and I'm going to stand like this. Ready, go. I've got to get this weight, my line of gravity, outside the front toe, and now I can start running. Again, essentially a series of falls. Move the set line of gravity outside the base of the force, fall and catch it. Fall and catch it kind of thing. So that's why you want, if you want mobility, you want a small base of support, or you want your line of gravity very, 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 very close to the edge of the base support. Sprint start, right? On your blocks, fingers on the ground. You want your line of gravity a millimeter behind your fingers. So as soon as you hit a gun, you just move a touch forward and you're gone. You start falling, you start running. If I was doing a sprint start and my hands were here and my weight was back here, it says go, I've got to move that line of gravity a long, 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 long way before I can start moving. So stability is inversely related to mobility in terms of the base support. All right. We talked about this before, different types of forces. You have to skip that. We use these all the time in therapy, not areas in therapy, but third band buoyancy, the time of force we give. What time got? No.
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes. 5 minutes on levers. You all know them, right? Quickly. So a lever, all had this, right? We've done, levers. There will be a pronunciation exam at the end of the class. If you say lever, you fail.
No.
Grading.
Disagree. That's
Pass with Catherine, you fail for me. So a lever has a fulcrum, a pivot-pointal axis, as a load or resistance, as a force or an effort. Right? And the arms, the distance between those, load arm or resistance arm, force arm or effort arm. This is a classic teeter-totter. Right? Nothing new here. You determine the mechanical advantage of a lever system by this little equation here. Effort arm over resistance arm. You've all seen this before? Yes, no? All right. So the mechanical advantage of a first-class lever is always what? 1, less than 1, greater than 1, 0. What is it? Anything. It could be anything. It can be 1. If these two are equal, if those two equal, perfectly balanced to the top, it's going to be 1. This distance equals this distance. It equals 1. 10 over 10, 1. It can be less than 1 or greater than 1, depending on where this fulcrum is. Okay? We use first-class levers all the time. Archimedes said, give me a place to stand, I can move the earth. Remember that saying? Basically, give me a long enough lever, far enough away from the object, I can move it. Whatever it is, if you've got a long enough lever, you can move it. So yeah, mechanical advantage greater than 1, less than 1, teeter-totter.
Pictures.
This is Kathy's slide. Everything comes up from Kathy's slide. Nice. Spend a lot of time on animation. Head nodding. First-class lever. First-class lever here. Supraspinatus pulling on the arm to lift it up. Right. First-class lever. Triceps extension. Here's your Leckinen process. Here's your triceps. Elbow is the joint. Arm is the weight. This way. Anyway. First-class lever. Okay. So the mechanical advantage can be either greater or less than 1. Second-class lever, your load or the resistance is in between the force and the fulcrum. So it has to be always greater than 1, because the arm, the lever arm or the moment arm or the force arm is always longer than the load or resistance arm. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be a second-class lever. So your wheelbarrow, for example, effort at the end, part of stuff in the middle, fulcrum is the wheel. Mechanic always greater than 1. Raising your heels off the ground using a gastrocnemius is a good example. Not many of those in the body, very few. more first class, but there are more, third class. Third class here is mechanical advantage is always less than 1. Because the force, the biceps here is always between the can of beer and the fulcrum. We are made up of third class levers. If we didn't have third class levers, if we had second class levers, we'd be a big blob of muscle. Imagine, so your muscle would have to go from here to the end of my hand. There'd be my biceps going from here to here, right? And my beer would be here somewhere. It'd be one big massive blob of muscle. We have no limbs. You couldn't have limbs. The whole point of limbs to throw and catch and move the extremities around. You only can do that with third class levers, really. Where the effort, the force, whatever it is, the biceps, the brachialis is close to the joint, and the weight is a long way from the joint. So disadvantage of that, of course, is this massive, terrible mechanical advantage of less than 1. The smaller this arm is here, relative to this arm, the weaker the mechanical advantage, the more force we have to apply to get the thing moving. What is the advantage of having third class levers? Disadvantage, of course, is terrible force development. They have to make way more. To hold a 10-pound dumbbell in my hand, I have to create way more force than 10 pounds of muscle to hold it. And what does it help? Why do we have these? Because of the range of motion, the speed of motion. Just like when I mentioned that thing up here before. Here's my third class lever. Here's my biceps. And here's my weight, my ball I want to throw. If I contract this 1 inch, that's 10, it goes to whatever, 20 degrees. My hand also goes to 20 degrees, but look at the distance it's gone. Way further and way faster in terms of linear stuff. Because linear velocity, when I chuck something, I want linear speed. I won't be able to have joints and be able to pick up things if I didn't have third class levers, okay? So we're primarily lots and lots of third class levers. What else?
That's where we got.
Is that where we got
I think you did it.
Questions? Was that too slow? Yeah.
Let's speed it up.
Was it too fast? Yeah. Just perfect. That's the right answer. Just perfect. Now, seriously, we can go over this in lab again. We're going to, it's just a review, hopefully. We'll slow down when we get to the new stuff. But hopefully, most that you've had.
Yes. Yep.
So, to be honest, how many people had 80